another awesome Magister Foley Culture Day. Today we're going to be talking about Romana Domus, or the Roman house. And this might be a review for some of you, or most of you, hopefully. And what you will see is a few terms, and last year you might have been responsible for more than these terms, but I just want to be very clear that Ms. Foley will only hold you accountable for the terms that you see and hear in this presentation, as well as on the Edmodo quiz and your culture sheet. So we have a few words for home or house. Domus is one, casa is another, villa is another, which is more of like a country vacation home. When I think of the word domus, I think more of a townhouse or brownstone, but you'll get a sense of what it would be like. And I know that many of you come from different backgrounds and have different experiences with living situations, but the goal is hopefully that all of you grow up, get the American dream, and own your own home. So maybe you can take some of these ideas that you learned about today and someday find them in your own home. However, the Romans didn't just have houses, they also had apartment buildings, and that's what we call insulae, which, yes, is the same term for an island. So these were multiple stories, which therefore house multiple families and multiple problems. And many of you probably live in an apartment building yourself, so you can relate to this kind of idea. Problems that they would have would be sanitation, so they did not have indoor plumbing the way we do. So you could only imagine when you have multiple families sharing small spaces, how that would work, and therefore overcrowding. Some of you might be familiar with this idea that there is a maximum occupancy in many buildings, especially public buildings. So if you go to a restaurant, somewhere posted is usually the maximum occupancy. And that is to try to cut down on dangers, especially if there is a fire. And remember, they did not have indoor plumbing, as we already said, but they also didn't have modern day electricity. It was not invented yet. So how did they see? Well, first they would see through natural light, but also when it got dark, they would depend on fire. And that is something that we'll be talking about later, the goddess of the home, etc. But fire was definitely very real. And just as we unfortunately see today in recent events in Boston, fire was deadly then, and it's deadly today. And that is always a very real concern. Now we're going to look at some real pictures from Ostia, which is the port city for Rome, which is in the mouth of the Tiber River, and it has some remains of the port city. And after we go through the different areas of the home, I'm going to share some personal pictures of when I was in Pompeii and Ostia. But this is a sense of what some of these insulae would be like, so you can tell that there are multiple levels. And here's a picture from the street with someone waving outside of the window. And here's a view from that window looking down. So very, very narrow. I always think of the North End kind of area, very compact, very busy, etc. So back to a general layout. So this is what we typically teach it as. So let's look at it. Most of you are familiar with layouts of homes based on the board game Clue. Now, Clue is based on a mansion, so they have, a library and a ballroom. It does have a kitchen. Ironically, there is no bathroom, which you would expect, but this is very, very fancy. So I'm going to bring it back to simpler terms, and a traditional American home might have a layout like this, where you expect there to be a bathroom, a kitchen, some kind of common living space, and at least a bedroom with a closet. And I particularly enjoy this picture because look at the ratio of the car to the living space. Very interesting point of view for Americans, but when you grow up and you are looking for your house of your own, you will expect to find a bathroom, a kitchen, some kind of living space, and at least a bedroom. And what I want to point out is that even though it has all of these elements, the layout changes from house to house. And that is something I want you to understand. I'm going to talk about the typical rooms that you'd expect to find in a Roman house, but each house is a little different. Some have more, some have less, but we are going to get the general idea, similar to this image. So, the layout. looks like this. And you can find this image in my classroom on the poster called Ancient Rome. And you can tell that it has a traditional roof and it's open and it's cut out so that you can still see inside. So we're going to look at different terms. And these are the major terms that you will know plus a few others. So the vestibulum would be the entryway from the street. So the outside door, some kind of walkway, and then the real home. And on either side of it, you'll find different things. One thing would be the tablinum, which is the master's study, which I will talk about later on. Next is the impluvium, which is that very famous pool of water that you might find in a Roman house. And it would collect the rainwater from the opening in the ceiling, which is called the compluvium. The atrium is a greeting place where people, visitors might be waiting, also known as kind of a reception room. So you're waiting for the pater familias or the mater familias, the father and mother of the home, and do their business. The peristilium is my personal favorite, and that is that garden that is interior. So an interior garden or hortus, which is an interesting approach that you bring nature inside. Usually it would have columns, it's open to the air, and you might find flowers, statues, etc. The culina would be the kitchen, and if you know someone who is studying the culinary arts, they are studying fancy cooking. And remember that the Romans did have slaves, so it wouldn't be the pater familias or the mater familias usually in there. It would be slaves cooking, and remember the mater familias would be weaving or doing something else. Next up is the triclinium, which is going to be a topic for a later date, and that is where they would eat. So fancy dining room, and it gets the tri from the 3 benches or couches that they would recline on while they would eat. So a different custom than what typical Americans are used to, and there would be one space open, and that is for a slave to bring in the food and put it on a table in the middle of the 3 couches. And we'll be looking at this more in detail later on in the year. The cubiculum is a teenager's favorite place, and that is the bedroom. Now, what is different from the Romans and you modern Americans would be typically a teenager's bedroom is plastered with posters and other extensions of yourself, where the Romans kept it very sparse and simple because that was a place to sleep, not for distraction. So no cell phones, no computers, even if they had them, this was a place meant to sleep. So some of you might think about that if you're having trouble sleeping. So here's another quick review. So you might want to screenshot this if it helps you. And now we're going to take a look at some real life pictures. So a vestibulum might look something like this. This is from the House of Fawn in Pompeii. Very, very impressive and ornate. Then you get the atrium and impluvium and peristilium. So in the foreground you can see the little puddle, depressed looking thing, and you can tell that it could collect water. And in the background that has the columns, you can tell that that would be the peristilium. Next up is an example of an atrium and compluvium. So the impluvium would be on the ground where the water would collect. The compluvium is the open space, and you can tell that it's open to the elements because sunshine is pouring into it. And the general area around this or nearby it would be where guests would wait. This is my particular favorite picture of a peristilium. So as you can tell, there are columns all around it and giant shrubberies, beautiful, and let's be real. Wouldn't you want a giant palm tree in your house? Not outside, in your house? Pretty awesome. The taberna, now you might confuse this image with a latrina, different things. A taberna would be a shop. So in each of those little circles, there would be something that they would sell, spices, nuts, what have you. And this is an idea that we've maintained in some places in the United States where a family might live above their own store. So some of you might be able to connect with that. And this might be on one side, and on the other side would be the tablinum, and that is the master's office, and that is where the pater familias, or the father of the house, would keep records, family histories, the family death mass of ancestors, everything pertaining to the family or business would be kept in the tablinum, to not be confused with the taberna, which is a store. The culina, this is from Pompeii. This would be an example of a wood cooking stove, and if you've ever been to a store such as Bertucci's, not a store, a restaurant, Bertucci's, you might see a similar design. And when they excavated Pompeii, they did find some preserved loaves of bread that were in the process of baking at the time. And of course, nature calls, and this would be an example of a public restroom, and that's what a latrina is, and gentlemen might be able to connect with the general look of this. And the design is basically a hollowed bench, and in fancy public restrooms there might be running water from the aqueducts that would help keep it somewhat sanitary. And of course they did have those sticks with sponges, because toilet paper? Huh? What? And you might think this is a strange, gross, yuck, but don't we still have public restrooms today? Yes, we do, and some of them are fancier than others. Similar idea back in the ancient world. So now we are at the end of the flipped classroom. In actual class, we might explore using iPads and check out a few other resources. My favorite place would be the Palazzo in Rome, where they discovered 2 Roman homes underneath a palace and have used technology such as lasers and projectors to bring it to life, and that's something I will talk about in class. But now you should take a moment to check out Edmodo, because there will be a quiz up, just to check in with you to see how much of this you can recall and connect to. And an in-class bell, you will get a culture sheet to help you keep all of these terms straight. So I will see you in class. Get excited. Bye. Or should I say, walete.